I'm Kayla. I'm 24. And according to my aunt and uncle, I should be grateful they took me in at all. Funny how that works. When someone inherits everything and gives you nothing but a cement floor and a lecture. Let me back up. Both my parents died in a car accident when I was 19. One moment, I was planning finals. The next, I was picking out caskets. No siblings. No grandparents. Just me and whatever pieces were left. And the house, the one I grew up in, should have been mine. But my Uncle Darren, my dad's younger brother, showed up at the funeral with a lawyer and a smirk. Said there were paperwork issues, that my dad never updated the deed, that because Darren had co-signed a loan 10 years ago, the house passed to him. I was too stunned to fight, too numb. I remember nodding. I remember him saying, "You can still live here, Kayla. We're family." And for a moment, I believed him until I saw the basement. That's what they offered me. Not a room, not even a door, just a dusty, unfinished basement. A pull-out cot, a metal rack for clothes, one small window where I could see the neighbor's tire rims. Meanwhile, upstairs, Aunt Jenna was repainting the living room with coastal beige and shopping for accent chairs. Darren turned my dad's office into his home gym. They even turned my childhood bedroom into a guest room for when Jenna's sister visits. I asked about using the kitchen. Jenna told me, "Of course, sweetie. Just clean up after yourself immediately. We have a system." The system, apparently, meant I was allowed upstairs between 6 a.m. and 7:15 a.m. and after 9:30 p.m. Otherwise, I got side-eyed like a raccoon in their designer kitchen. They never asked how school was going, never asked how I was doing. They just told me I should be grateful. Grateful that they let me live rent-free. Grateful that they didn't kick me out. Grateful for the basement. The worst part? I started to believe it. I worked at a bookstore part-time, tried to finish my associate's degree online. Every night I came home exhausted, crawled into that damp basement, and stared at the wood beams above my head like they held some kind of answer. But all they held was their entitlement. It was a Tuesday when it all shifted. I came upstairs to grab a snack between online classes. I thought they were out, but apparently Darren was home early. I grabbed a banana, about to head back down when he walked in. He looked at me, not like a person, but like a problem. "Hey," he said, "you've been using a lot of electricity lately." I blinked. What? The lights, the Wi-Fi, the microwave. It adds up. Jenna and I were thinking maybe you could chip in a little. Nothing major. $100 a month. I stared at him. I had $43 in my checking account. He grinned like he was being generous. "Still a good deal for a place like this, right?" A place like this. He meant my house. The house with my parents' initials still carved into the back patio. The one where I learned to ride a bike. Where my mom used to sing while washing dishes. Where my dad made pancakes every Sunday. Badly, but with love. I walked back downstairs in silence. But I didn't cry. Not this time. Instead, I opened my laptop, started searching, reading, downloading county records, property tax sites, zoning laws, rental platforms. I stayed up until 3 a.m., and by morning I had a plan. They wanted me to be grateful for the basement? Fine. I'd make the basement mine, and then I'd make the upstairs pay for it. Most people think revenge starts with a big moment, a dramatic outburst, a slammed door, a courtroom. Mine started with Wi-Fi. See, Darren and Jenna never thought I was smart. They thought I was quiet, timid, emotionally fragile after losing my parents. Someone who didn't ask questions, someone who stayed in the basement. But what they didn't realize was, I was watching. I knew Darren left for work at 7:45 a.m. every weekday, and didn't come home until 6. Jenna did freelance decorating from her laptop in the sunroom, but most days she was gone by 10 a.m., shopping for clients, and didn't return until mid-afternoon. They kept the thermostat locked, never used the guest room, and insisted on their clean surface rule, which meant I couldn't leave anything visible upstairs. I wasn't family, I was background, and that gave me space. I started by setting up my own Wi-Fi router, a cheap one, separate from theirs. Used my bookstore paycheck. Then I bought a smart plug, a cheap surge protector, and a portable countertop oven. Bit by bit, I created a small world downstairs, just mine. It wasn't much, but it was independent. I also did something they never thought to do. I read the mail, not their mail. I wasn't stupid, but the public ones. HOA newsletters, energy usage statements, property tax notices. And that's when I saw it. The mortgage was paid off. My parents had finished it 3 months before they died, which meant Darren didn't have monthly payments. He wasn't struggling. He was profiting. I dug deeper, looked into the home's assessed value, compared it to short-term rental prices in our area. That's when I found out something that changed everything. The upstairs could easily rent for $2,400 a month. 2 bedrooms, sunroom, updated kitchen, large yard. He was sitting on money, while charging me to live in a basement with one damp corner and a light bulb that buzzed. So I made a choice. I wouldn't move out. I'd move up. It started with my school refund check, $1,000. Instead of saving it for tuition, I invested it. A proper space heater, curtains for the tiny window, wall panels to absorb the cold and sound. I even bought a gently used futon and assembled it piece by piece on the cement floor. Then I applied for a home-based business license. Technically, I was offering consultation services for tutoring and digital marketing. I needed that paperwork for what came next. I opened a new checking account, created a clean digital trail, and then I listed the guest room on Airbnb. Now, here's the trick. I didn't advertise it as my own home. I simply posed as a live-in assistant manager, renting a room in a home where the owners were gone most days, which was true. I posted beautiful shots of the sunroom, the guest room with the freshly made bed, photos I took on Jenna's client staging days when she wasn't home. I staged it just enough to make it cozy but impersonal. And to my surprise, someone booked it. For 3 nights, $200. I nearly passed out. I cleared it with precise timing, cleaned everything, washed sheets, scrubbed bathrooms, stocked the coffee station with instant pods I bought in bulk. When the guest arrived, Jenna was out. I greeted her upstairs in a plain hoodie and jeans, gave her the access code to the side door, and reminded her the owners were very private, so she should keep noise low. She didn't ask questions. She just handed me a smile and went upstairs with her suitcase. I went back downstairs and shook. I couldn't believe it worked. The first night, I didn't sleep. I kept refreshing the camera feed from the little plug-in security cam I'd hidden inside a bookshelf facing the hallway. The guest didn't touch anything. She was clean, quiet. Left the next morning for sightseeing and returned with takeout. By the time she checked out, she'd left a 5-star review. I used the money to pay for 2 more listings. Within 3 weeks, I had another guest, and then a weekend booking. Darren and Jenna didn't notice a thing. Jenna chalked the fresh sheets up to me, trying to help. Darren never stepped foot in the guest room, and I stayed in the basement like a ghost with a Wi-Fi signal. But then Jenna changed the locks. It was a Tuesday. I came home from work to find my key no longer fit the side door. My stomach dropped. I rang the bell. She opened it with a pinched expression and said we just thought it was time to reset the boundaries. Boundaries. She said she'd give me a new key once we've had a family meeting. I waited. That weekend, they called me upstairs like I was sat me down on the leather couch. Darren folded his arms. Jenna crossed her legs like a magazine model. We've been patient, Kayla, Darren said. But it's not working. You're using up our utilities, taking up space. And now Jenna found your router and mini oven. That's unsafe. I paid for them, I said calmly. That's not the point, Jenna snapped. It's our house. We never agreed to turn the basement into a micro apartment. It's my parents' house, I said quietly. Darren's mouth twitched. Your parents are gone. The paperwork is what it is. And then Jenna leaned forward, looking at me like I was something sticky under her shoe. You should be grateful we've let you stay this long. There it was again. Grateful. Like they handed me a gift instead of stealing my home. I nodded slowly. Okay, I said. You're right. Their faces lit up with relief. I'll move out, I said. Just give me 30 days. They agreed instantly. But what they didn't know was that I'd already applied for temporary property management rights under an obscure tenant clause in our state housing laws, because even though they owned the deed, I was a registered resident, which meant I could challenge use of space. And with my business license in hand, a trail of rental income, and copies of messages between guests and me, I had a case. I'd been quiet, but I wasn't powerless. The night before I planned to confront them officially, I stood in the backyard. It was the same yard where my dad once taught me how to garden. The same yard where my mom spilled lemonade laughing so hard at one of his terrible jokes. Their voices were gone, but the love still lingered. I placed my palm on the back fence. I'm not leaving, I whispered. I'm taking it back. And I meant it. People like Darren and Jenna never expect quiet girls to fight back. They expect breakdowns. They expect begging. They expect submission. They don't expect strategy. The next morning, I got up early and walked into the county clerk's office with a folder in my hand and proof in my eyes. I had everything. My business license, my Airbnb transaction history, screenshots of guest messages, photos of the guest room as a private rental, utility bills with my name, and the big one, a formal petition for a right of use review, under a clause in our local housing code designed to protect long-term tenants from being unfairly displaced by co-owners or inheritors who alter occupancy rights without written lease terms. I wasn't asking to take the house back. I was asking the court to recognize that I had a legitimate stake in the property's functional value and that Darren and Jenna had financially benefited from ignoring it. I filed the paperwork. Then I went home, walked straight past Jenna in the kitchen, and said with a smile, "You'll be getting a letter from the city this week. Just a heads up." Her smoothie cup clattered in the sink. The letter arrived 2 days later. I didn't see their faces when they opened it, but I heard the explosion. "What the hell is this?" That was Darren, yelling from the living room. I stayed downstairs, calm, waiting. 10 minutes later, Jenna banged on the top of the basement stairs. "You need to come upstairs, right now." I didn't move. She stomped down the first 3 steps. I said, "I'm not obligated to meet with you," I said quietly. "All future discussions will go through mediation or court." You could have heard a pin drop. I walked into the bathroom, closed the door, and smiled at myself in the mirror. Not out of smugness, out of relief. Because for the first time since my parents died, I wasn't playing defense. I was finally taking control. What came next wasn't fast, but it was real. Within 2 weeks, we were scheduled for mediation. The city sent a housing official to review the space. They inspected the basement, the guest room, the tax records. I gave them everything they needed. So did Darren and Jenna, except their paperwork was messy. Their gift of residence to me had never been formalized. No lease, no notices, no rules. I, on the other hand, had structure, logs, evidence of repairs I'd made downstairs out of pocket, receipts, time-stamped photos, and the biggest kicker, rental income earned under my name for a room they ignored. The housing official said it flatly. "You may own the deed, Mr. Monroe, but you cannot deny that Miss Kayla Monroe has established a residential and business use claim under the shared property agreement." That shut them up. At the mediation table, Darren fumed while Jenna stared daggers. "She's been renting our home behind our backs," Jenna hissed. "Correction," I said calmly. "I rented my portion of the home. You gave me the basement. I accepted it and made use of it, while you left the upstairs underutilized. That's not trespassing. That's adaptive tenancy, which I'm well within my legal rights to do, since I've been paying utilities and maintaining my section independently." The mediator didn't even flinch. "We can proceed to small claims," she said. "But based on evidence, it's likely the court would honor Miss Monroe's petition to continue occupancy and pursue compensation for her share of the rental value." Darren's face turned the color of expired mayonnaise. They called for a break while they whispered furiously in the hallway. I sat outside on a bench with my hands folded and my pulse racing. Then my phone buzzed. A message from my Airbnb account. New reservation confirmed, 5 nights, 37 in. I laughed under my breath, right there, on the bench, in the middle of legal war. Because even if they dragged this through court, I was already winning. Eventually, they agreed to a settlement. They'd allow me to formally lease the basement with rights to limited upstairs access. In exchange, I'd pay but I also retained the legal right to sublease any unused upstairs space as part of my shared residential business model, which meant legally I could keep running Airbnb listings upstairs as long as I followed safety codes and remained in residence. It was a loophole, and it was gold. Darren signed the agreement like it burned his hand. Jenna refused to look at me. I went home, updated my listing, and booked the next 2 weekends within 48 hours. A month later, I used the accumulated money to build out a kitchenette in the basement, mini fridge, small sink, countertop oven, my own kitchen, no more walking upstairs to feel like a burden. By the end of the summer, I had 6 glowing guest reviews and nearly $2,000 in reserve. I used some of that to buy a locking cabinet system. Jenna had tried snooping once, never again. I also added a second camera for hallway coverage, just in case. And then, something unexpected happened. One of the guests was a young woman mid-20s, bright smile, quiet voice. On her last day, she lingered near the door. "You live here?" she asked. I nodded. She smiled. "You're doing something smart, something real. My mom always told me to make use of what people ignore." She handed me a thank you note. Inside was $40 in cash, not a tip. It read, "A seed for wherever you grow next." I kept it in my drawer, unspent. A reminder, because this wasn't just about reclaiming space. This was about proving that even in the dark, even in the basement, you can build something powerful, something sustainable, something that pays back what they tried to steal. Darren and Jenna still lived upstairs, but they were visitors now. They knew it. I knew it. They stopped speaking to me unless absolutely necessary, and when they did, their voices were clipped, careful, because they knew that girl in the basement, she wasn't scared anymore. She was profitable. People like Darren and Jenna never expect quiet girls to fight back. They expect breakdowns. They expect begging. They expect submission. They don't expect strategy. The next morning, I got up early and walked into the county clerk's office with a folder in my hand and proof in my eyes. I had everything: my business license, my Airbnb transaction history, screenshots of guest messages, photos of the guest room as a private rental, utility bills with my name, and the big one, a formal petition for a right of use review under a clause in our local housing code, designed to protect long-term tenants from being unfairly displaced by co-owners or inheritors who alter occupancy rights without written lease term. I wasn't asking to take the house back. I was asking the court to recognize that I had a legitimate stake in the property's functional value and that Darren and Jenna had financially benefited from ignoring it. I filed the paperwork. Then I went home, walked straight past Jenna in the kitchen, and said with a smile, "You'll be getting a letter from the city this week? Just a heads up." Her smoothie cup clattered in the sink. The letter arrived 2 days later. I didn't see their faces when they opened it, but I heard the explosion. "What the hell is this?" That was Darren yelling from the living room. I stayed downstairs, calm, waiting. 10 minutes later, Jenna banged on the top of the basement stairs. "You need to come upstairs right now." I didn't move. She stomped down the first 3 steps. I said, "I'm not obligated to meet with you," I said quietly. "All future discussions will go through mediation or court." You could have heard a pin drop. I walked into the bathroom, closed the door, and smiled at myself in the mirror, not out of smugness, out of relief, because for the first time since my parents died, I wasn't playing defense. I was finally taking control. What came next wasn't fast, but it was real. Within 2 weeks, we were scheduled for mediation. The city sent a housing official to review the space. They inspected the basement, the guest room, the tax records. I gave them everything they needed. So did Darren and Jenna, except their paperwork was messy. Their gift of residence to me had never been formalized. No lease, no notices, no rules. I, on the other hand, had structure, logs, evidence of repairs I'd made downstairs out of pocket, receipts, time-stamped photo, and the biggest kicker, rental income earned under my name for a room they ignored. The housing official said it flatly. You may own the deed, Mr. Monroe, but you cannot deny that Miss Kayla Monroe has established a residential and business use claim under the shared property agreement. That shut them up. At the mediation table, Darren fumed, while Jenna stared daggers. She's been renting our home behind our backs, Jenna hissed. Correction, I said calmly. I rented my portion of the home. You gave me the basement. I accepted and made use of it, while you left the upstairs underutilized. That's not trespassing. That's adaptive tenancy, which I'm well within my legal rights to do, since I've been paying utilities and maintaining my section independently. The mediator didn't even flinch. We can proceed to small claims, she said, but based on evidence it's likely the court would honor Miss Monroe's petition to continue occupancy and pursue compensation for her share of the rental value. Darren's face turned the color of expired mayonnaise. They called for a break. While they whispered furiously in the hallway, I sat outside on a bench with my hands folded and my pulse racing. Then my phone buzzed. A message from my Airbnb account. New reservation confirmed. 5 nights. $37. I laughed under my breath. Right there. On the bench. In the middle of legal war. Because even if they dragged this through court, I was already winning. Eventually, they agreed to a settlement. They'd allow me to formally lease the basement with rights to limited upstairs access. In exchange, I'd pay $150 a month, but I also retained the legal right to sublease any unused upstairs space as part of my shared residential business model, which meant, legally, I could keep running Airbnb listings upstairs as long as I followed safety codes and remained in residence. It was a loophole, and it was golden. Darren signed the agreement like it burned his hand. Jenna refused to look at me. I went home, updated my listing, and booked the next 2 weekends within 48 hours. A month later, I used the accumulated money to build out a kitchenette in the basement. Mini fridge, small sink, countertop oven. My own kitchen, no more walking upstairs to feel like a burden. By the end of the summer, I had 6 glowing guest reviews and nearly $2,000 in reserve. I used some of that to buy a locking cabinet system. Jenna had tried snooping once. Never again. I also added a second camera for hallway coverage, just in case. And then, something unexpected happened. One of the guests was a young woman, mid-20s, bright smile, quiet voice. On her last day, she lingered near the door. You live here? She asked. I nodded. She smiled. You're doing something smart, something real. My mom always told me to make use of what people ignore. She handed me a thank you note. Inside was $40 in cash. Not a tip, it read. A seed, for wherever you grow next. I kept it in my drawer, unspent. A reminder, because this wasn't just about reclaiming space. This was about proving that even in the dark, even in the basement, you can build something powerful, something sustainable, something that pays back what they tried to steal. Darren and Jenna still lived upstairs, but they were visitors now. They knew it. I knew it. They stopped speaking to me unless absolutely necessary, and when they did, their voices were clipped, careful, because they knew that girl in the basement, she wasn't scared anymore. She was profitable. People kept asking me how I pulled it off, how I turned a basement into a business, how I stood up to 2 people who tried to trap me in silence, how I kept going when I should have folded, and I always answered the same way. I started small, but I stayed consistent. That was the secret. Not luck. Not rage. Not even revenge. Consistency. I kept my listing clean, my reviews 5 stars, my sheets fresh, and my paperwork perfect. Darren and Jenna, they didn't keep up. They coasted. After the settlement, they tried to act like nothing had happened, but the energy in the house had shifted completely. They no longer spoke to me, unless it was about noise levels, or trash schedules. I responded with short, polite nods and then booked another guest. They grumbled, but they couldn't stop me. Not anymore. That fall, I enrolled full-time to finish my degree. I switched to remote freelancing, started offering digital ad consultations to small local businesses. My side income doubled. By winter, I had enough to do what I'd always dreamed of, reclaiming space. Not just metaphorically, literally. The attic. No one used it. Darren never even opened the pull-down ladder, unless it was for holiday junk. I asked him casually one afternoon, "Hey, what's going on with the attic?" He scoffed. "Full of insulation and mice, probably. Mind if I clear it?" He shrugged. "Do what you want. Just don't burn the house down." So I did. It was dusty, cramped, and freezing. But it was mine. I spent 3 weekends cleaning it top to bottom, insulated the walls, laid down wood laminate, installed soft lighting, and brought in a beanbag chair, low table, and a bookshelf of my mom's old favorites I'd rescued from boxes in the garage. I made it a creative den, a place no one else could touch. It smelled like cedar, lavender, and a little bit of freedom. I started writing again, journaling, drafting, business plans, dreaming past survival. Then came the holidays. I expected the usual distance, passive-aggressive comments, Jenna rolling her eyes at my tech setup in the basement, Darren huffing whenever he passed a guest in the hallway. But what I didn't expect was them trying to flip the narrative. Jenna cornered me one evening before New Year's, dressed in her cashmere lounge set and holding a glass of Pinot. "You know, Kayla," she said sweetly, "we were thinking, maybe it's time we raise the rent. You're running a business now, after all." I blinked. The audacity. "You signed the agreement," I said calmly. "Fixed terms for 1 year." She sipped her wine. "Still, it's about fairness. You're using the house to make money. We should all benefit." I looked her dead in the eye. "You did benefit. You got years of rent-free silence, utility help, and a tax write-off while I lived in a cement box with one outlet and no door." Her face twitched. I smiled. "Happy New Year," and walked away. 2 weeks later, Darren tried his hand at manipulation. He knocked on the basement door one morning, something he never did, and said, "I've been thinking. What if we sold the house?" That got my attention. I opened the door slowly. "You mean you're planning to sell?" "Just thinking about it," he said, voice casual. "Market's hot. We could cash out, maybe move somewhere quieter. Start fresh." I knew what he meant. We. But not me. They thought they could just sell it all and push me out with a 30-day notice. They didn't know I'd been preparing for this exact moment for months. I tilted my head and said, "You'd need my cooperation." He blinked. "What?" "This house is currently registered as a shared-use business under my license. I have active listings, active income, and residential tenancy protections. If you try to sell without honoring my claim, I can file an injunction. That means your buyer has to take me my business and my contract with them, or walk away." His jaw clenched. I continued, "Or you can buy me out." "Excuse me?" "You heard me. Pay me for my share of the equity I've built, the upgrades I've made, the value I've added. I have the records to back it all." He didn't answer, just walked off. I shut the door with a calm I hadn't felt in years. That weekend I met with a real estate attorney. I brought a flash drive with everything: Airbnb data, rent logs, tax records, expense spreadsheets, photos, emails, video walkthroughs. She was floored. "You've built a sustainable rental model inside a shared residence," she said. "They're not your landlords. They're cohabitants who failed to maintain occupancy agreements." "Can they evict me?" I asked. She smiled. "Not without paying you first." I nearly cried in her office, not out of fear, out of validation. Because for the first time, I knew I wasn't just fighting, I was winning. By spring, I had saved enough to make my own offer. No joke, I called Darren into the kitchen one morning and slid a manila folder across the counter. "What's this?" he grunted. "My formal offer," I said, "to buy you out." He opened it. $170,000. A private loan I qualified for with the help of 2 local business partners and a first-time homebuyer incentive. The deposit? Already in escrow. You can take the money, I said. Walk away and move wherever you want. Jenna came in halfway through and started sputtering. This is absurd. We're not letting some basement brat buy us out. But Darren, he looked tired, not angry, just exhausted. And I realized something in that moment. People like them didn't want responsibility. They wanted control. But I had made the house work. They had let it rot. He folded the folder shut. I'll think about it, he muttered. 2 weeks later, they accepted. They packed up their lives, what little they'd built, and left in a U-Haul without saying goodbye. I stood on the porch as they drove away. No tears, no triumph, just peace. Because I didn't need them to say anything. The silence said it all. I moved upstairs that night, tore down Jenna's coastal beige curtains, painted the walls in the colors my mom used to love, set up my office in the sunroom, hung my diploma on the wall, and then I lit a candle, curled up on the couch and opened my journal. This house tried to bury me in the basement, but I built a ladder. One rental, one review, one fight at a time. And now, I own the whole damned thing. The first night I spent upstairs alone, I cried. Not because I was sad, not because I missed them, but because every corner of the house suddenly felt mine. The air didn't feel heavy anymore. The floors didn't creak like they were warning me I didn't belong. Even the silence was different. It didn't echo with shame or fear. It felt clean, earned. I curled up on the couch in the living room they once banned me from, under a blanket I bought myself, and watched the lights flicker softly through the windows, and I let myself exhale. For the first time in years, I could breathe. The next morning, I stood in the kitchen, my kitchen, and made pancakes. Burnt the first batch, just like my dad used to. I laughed to myself as the smoke curled upward and cracked open the window. I wasn't in survival mode anymore. I was home, and I had no plans of wasting that, so I got to work. The basement, once my prison, became my project. I cleared out the cot, the old racks, the taped-up curtain I once used as a door. I kept one thing, the futon. The one I had bought with my refund check, piece by piece. It stayed, a reminder. Then I painted the walls a soft sage green, installed floating shelves, brought in soft lamps and fresh rugs, bought a mini fridge with a glass front, and stocked it with drinks and snacks. I turned it into a studio apartment, a space for someone who needed a beginning like I did. But not a basement, a launch pad. I posted the listing online, not as an Airbnb this time, but as a transitional rental for young women in school or between jobs. I called it the Second Start Studio. Applicants needed no deposit, just a short application, a goal, and a promise to treat the space with respect. Within a week I had 20 messages. I chose a 21-year-old girl named Naomi. She'd just aged out of foster care, working 2 jobs, studying graphic design online. When she walked in for the first time, she kept saying, "This can't be real. You're sure? Just me?" I handed her the key. "Yes," I said. "Just you. You deserve more than a basement that makes you feel small." She burst into tears. And something in me healed right there. Meanwhile, the upstairs? I made it breathe again. I pulled the dusty beige curtains and threw them out, painted over Jenna's modern neutrals with warm earth tones, restored old furniture from the garage, refinished my parents' dining table. That table. It had seen everything. Thanksgivings, late-night homework, my mom's laughter echoing over chicken soup. I brought it back to life with polish, memory, and care. And I made a promise as I ran my fingers over its surface. This house would never be weaponized again. One evening, Naomi and I sat in the kitchen sipping tea. She asked, "Do you ever regret it?" "Regret what?" "Staying. Fighting." I thought about it. About the years in the dark, the silence, the way Jenna once hissed that I should be grateful they let me use their fancy soap. About how it felt to sleep with one eye open, to tiptoe, to feel like dust under someone else's shoes. And then I looked around, at the laughter now living in these walls, at the books on the shelf, at the life I was building. No, I don't regret staying. I regret waiting so long to believe I was allowed to take up space. Spring turned to summer, and with it came growth. I applied for a small community grant, one meant for low-income housing innovators, wrote up a proposal for transitional living units in residential neighborhoods. I used the story of the basement, of Naomi, of how spaces that once held trauma can become spaces of healing. 3 months later, I got the call. Approved. Not only did they award me the grant, but they offered to feature my program in their quarterly publication. I stood in the backyard, phone pressed to my ear, knees trembling, and whispered, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Because what started as a basement escape had become a blueprint. Then came the day I saw Darren again. I was dropping off paperwork at the county building, stepping into the elevator when I heard his voice in the lobby. He didn't see me, but I saw him. He looked smaller, not in size, in energy, in presence. He was talking to someone about a property deal that fell through. His voice didn't have the same swagger. His shirt was wrinkled. I didn't say anything, didn't wave, just watched the elevator doors close between us like a final curtain. And I realized he wasn't the villain anymore. He was just a man who tried to hold power he never earned and lost it. That weekend, I lit a candle in the living room, put on one of my mom's old records, sat in the sunroom and read for hours with the windows open. And at some point, I looked around and whispered to myself, "They gave me a basement. I built a life. And then I built a ladder high enough to own the house." I never set out to start a movement. I just wanted to survive, to breathe, to live in my own space without apologizing for every footstep. But somewhere between the burned pancakes and the basement remodel, I stumbled into something bigger, something people started to notice. It began with a blog post. A friend from my digital marketing class asked to feature me in a short interview on her women's empowerment site. She loved the idea of the Second Start studio and how I turned inherited silence into shared hope. I agreed, mostly because I thought it would be buried beneath 100 other stories. But 2 weeks after it went live, I got an email. Subject line: urgent. Daybreak morning show wants to feature you. I stared at it for 5 full minutes before I clicked. Daybreak. The actual Daybreak morning TV. National audience. Hosted by people who wear blazers and always smile too much. They wanted to do a segment on me. The producer wrote, "We were deeply moved by your journey from surviving in a basement to buying the home, flipping the dynamic and turning it into a support system for other women. We believe your story needs to be heard. Would you be willing to fly out for a taping next month? Travel and hotel covered, of course." I reread the email 10 times. Then I cried. Not because I needed the attention, but because a girl who once begged for quiet dignity in a cement room with no door was now being invited to speak on national television. And the world finally wanted to listen. Naomi was the first person I told. She screamed, hugged me, and started brainstorming outfits immediately. "You better wear something fierce," she said, flipping through my tiny closet. "This is your main character arc." I laughed. She wasn't wrong. I ended up picking a simple soft green blouse and tan trousers, comfortable but clean. The kind of outfit that said, "I belong here." And I built this. Flying out for the interview felt surreal. The studio was bright and intimidating. The makeup artist called me honey and used something called a high-definition concealer. The producer gave me cue cards and told me not to be nervous. The host, Lisa, greeted me backstage with a hug and said, "Your story gave me chills. Let's help some people today, okay?" And then I was on camera, under lights. Microphone clipped to my collar, my name spelled correctly on the lower third. Kayla Monroe, founder, the Second Start Studio. They asked about my parents, about the house, about how it felt to live under people who acted like they were doing me a favor. I told them the truth, that I was grateful, not for the basement, but for the fire it lit in me. That when people try to make you feel small, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stand where they never thought you'd rise. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of comments, emails, shares, former foster kids, college students living in cars, young women shoved into garages, couches, and corners, people who had survived quietly and were now ready to speak up. I spent hours responding. One message stood out. I've been living in my cousin's attic for 3 years. Your story made me realize I don't have to shrink anymore. Thank you for showing me what's possible. I screenshotted it, printed it, taped it to my bedroom mirror, because that was it. That was the why. When I got home, things moved fast. The mayor's office reached out. They wanted to highlight my program in a new housing initiative. A local nonprofit offered to help fund the studio space, covering utilities and groceries so my tenants could focus on building, not just surviving. And then I got a letter from a law firm representing Jenna. My stomach dropped. It was short and formal. She was requesting a goodwill settlement for her contributions to the home prior to her departure, claiming emotional investment and unpaid upkeep. I laughed, actually laughed out loud. The audacity never ended. My lawyer shut it down with a 2-line email and a PDF attachment showing her full release of interest in the property, signed and dated 6 months ago. I never heard from her again. That weekend, I hosted the first official Second Start open house. We invited the community, showed off the space, had a sign-up board for volunteers and mentors, served cookies Naomi made from scratch, and fruit punch in paper cups. One of my guests was a 19-year-old girl named Eliza. She didn't say much at first, just looked around, hands in her hoodie pockets. Then she said, "You were in the basement, right?" I nodded. She pointed to the futon. "Was that yours?" "Yes." She nodded again. "It's nice. Doesn't look like a basement anymore." I smiled. That's the idea. Later, when I found her name on the application sheet, my heart swelled. Another one. Another quiet voice ready to bloom. That night, I sat in the attic, my writing den. The air smelled like eucalyptus and fresh paper. I lit a candle, opened my notebook, and wrote. It started with me wanting space. Now I want that for every woman who's ever been boxed in. Not just a room, a chance, a key, a second start. Because gratitude should never mean silence. And basements are not where stories end, they're where ladders begin. They told me to be grateful for the basement. And now I stand on the porch of the house I own, handing out keys, not to guests, not to renters, to residents, to young women who need what I once needed. Not charity, not pity, a start. It's been 9 months since the Daybreak segment aired, 6 since Naomi finished her certification and moved out into her first real apartment. She still comes by every Thursday for dinner, and she still calls me boss babe, even though she's a boss in her own right now, freelancing and saving for a car. The Second Start studio became more than one room. It became a model. We expanded the program into the converted garage, 2 more units, a partnership with a local shelter, a waiting list. I wake up each morning in the bedroom I once wasn't allowed to step foot in, and I walk past a row of framed photos on the wall. Naomi, holding her apartment keys. Eliza, graduating from her GED course. Maya, receiving her scholarship for nursing school. 3 lives touched by what they tried to bury. 3 women who now take up space, loudly, beautifully, and without apology. Sometimes I still think about Darren and Jenna. I don't hate them. I don't even really feel angry anymore. They didn't break me. They revealed me, showed me who I was, what I could endure, what I could rebuild, but I no longer write about them. They're not the story anymore. We are. Last week I was invited to speak at a statewide housing reform panel. Big room, big audience, bigger nerve. I stood at a podium. Not unlike the one they made me sit at during mediation, but this time, I wasn't defending my right to exist. I was educating people on how to create new rights for others. When I finished my speech, a woman in the audience raised her hand. "What's your biggest piece of advice for someone who's living in the basement right now, figuratively or literally?" I paused. Then I said, "You are not lucky to be in that basement. They are lucky you haven't given up, but you don't owe them your silence. You owe yourself a future. The applause was overwhelming, but it wasn't the clapping that stayed with me. It was the quiet, the kind that follows truth, the kind that comes when someone realizes they're not alone. When I came home that night, the porch light was on. The air smelled like spring and tomato basil from the kitchen window. Inside, the hallway buzzed with soft voices, girls cooking together, music playing, someone laughing in the studio. And me? I just stood for a minute, hand on the doorframe, remembering what it felt like to tiptoe, to apologize for breathing, to wonder if I mattered. I looked up at the wooden beam above the stairs and smiled. That beam? It still has the pencil marks from when I was a kid. My dad measuring my height every year with a tiny line and the date scribbled next to it. The last one says, Kayla, age 17. Still growing. He had no idea how true that would be. The next morning, I got a call from a reporter. She said she was writing a book, Real Estate, Real Power, Women Who Took Back the Ground Beneath Them. She wanted me to be chapter 6. I almost said no, but then I remembered who I do this for. The girls who are reading this right now, in a basement or on a borrowed couch, or in the back seat of a car, wondering if they're ever going to matter again. So I said yes. That weekend, I updated the mission statement on our website. The new one reads, "We are not here because someone made space. We are here because we took it back and turned it into shelter, strategy, and something sacred." And then I added one more thing, a plaque on the outside of the house, right by the front door, built on disrespect, reinforced by resilience, owned by the girl they told to be grateful. Because they gave me a basement. But I gave the world a blueprint, and I'll never stop handing out keys.